السادة الحضور، يجب من حضراتكم العلم بأن ستظهر لكم في هذه اللحظات كود على الشاشة يمكنكم مسحه عن طريق الهواتف الذكية، وتجدونه أيضاً خلف البطاقة التعريفية الخاصة بكم، وذلك للتصويت على الأسئلة التي ستطرح على الجمهور خلال جلسات المؤتمر الخمس. السيدات والسادة، سوف نبدأ الآن أعمال الجلسة الأولى بعنوان التطورات الرقابية. يسرني دعوة السيدة ساليان تايلر لإدارة الجلسة، والمتحدثون فيها هم السيدة نانديني سوكومار، السيدة نزهة حياة، الدكتور محمد فريد صالح، والسيد تاجندر سانغ، والذي سينضم إلينا عبر الاتصال المرئي. نطلب من السادة المتحدثين التكرم بالصعود إلى المنصة.
Okay, good morning everyone, and Excellencies, distinguished guests. Welcome to this first panel. My name's Sally-Ann Taylor and I'm from Bloomberg. And first of all, I think we'd like to start off with a couple of keynotes from both Dr. Farid Saleh and Neza. Neza, would you like to go first? Have you got a timer?
Yes, well, good morning, everyone. Dr. Tamim bin Ahmed bin Ali, CEO of Qatar Financial Market Authority, Mr. Khalid Al-Hamoud, board member of CMA Saudi Arabia, chairman of the Union of Arab Securities, dear panelists, esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to stand before you today at this pivotal conference on the intersection of sustainability and financial technology. As we gathered here, we are poised at the forefront of a transformative era where the convergence of sustainability principles and technological innovation reshapes the finance landscape. Today, we embark on a journey to explore the challenges we face and the boundless opportunities that await us, particularly for those within our region. Let us delve into this crucial dialogue and uncover the pathways to a more sustainable and prosperous future together. Before, I would like to acknowledge the vital role of market participants as they deliver industry expertise and market insight to support regulatory policy and standard-setting work. It is not only standards that matter, but also industry practices that feed meaningful input to the regulatory efforts aimed at developing robust capital markets and positioning them as a vital source of funding for the economy, particularly in emerging markets. With the rising international activities in the securities and derivatives market and the technological advances that have facilitated the flow of capital across borders, it is crucial to maintain and reinforce the close cooperation and consultation among securities regulators and the industry. As capital markets are globally interconnected, misconduct and vulnerabilities are quickly widespread, which urges authorities to implement sound principles of international cooperation, effectively deter misconduct, prevent market disruption, and strengthens resilience. Regulators have a dual mandate to protect investors and promote the development of capital markets. However, they need to work hand in hand with industry participants to explore practical, efficient, and innovative ways to fulfill these objectives despite the ongoing geopolitical events. I want to highlight the latest regulatory development in the Africa Middle East Region Committee within IOSCO, and particularly in the Arab capital markets. The financial landscape within our region remains dynamic, characterized by ongoing initiatives aimed at reinforcing regulatory frameworks, combating illicit financial activities, and encouraging investment in financial instruments. Technological innovations and sustainable finance, as highlighted in the conference theme, are key priorities for regulators for the region. In an era marked by rapid technological advancement and growing awareness of environment sustainability, regulators are increasingly focusing on fostering innovation and sustainability to drive growth while addressing associated challenges. In the fintech area, the region is adopting active measures to foster technological innovation and support the expanding fintech industries. These efforts encompass enacting fintech laws, fostering the digital assets industry and framework, and leveraging fintech to improve financial inclusion and market digitalization. Particularly, regional regulators are giving significant importance to establishing frameworks for regulating crypto and digital asset activities. Additionally, they are addressing the challenges of adapting oversight methods to safeguard investors and maintain market stability amid the ongoing fintech trend. This highlights the need for strong fintech regulation and the development of capabilities to support innovative technologies in capital markets, all while ensuring investor protection. There is also a notable emphasis on sustainable finance, ethical investment, and adherence to social and governance standards. Initiatives such as the issuance of green or sustainability-linked bonds, regulatory exemption, the establishment of rules for labeling and issuing sustainability bonds, as well as the promotion of sustainable and corporate social responsibility standards, aims to incentivize and promote environmentally friendly investments. These efforts contribute to broader societal goals in line with sustainable development agendas. Moreover, capital markets are undergoing a series of regulatory development designed to strengthen market integrity and safeguard investor interests. In particular, regulatory authorities are adopting vigorous measures to bolster anti-money laundering and counter terrorist financing frameworks to mitigate risk associated with illicit financial activities. In the region, we have continued to achieve significant development across various areas, including oversight, modernization of legislation and regulation, stability in financial market, financial technology, and sustainability. We have also maintained vigilant oversight of financial markets' potential risks, such as market volatility, liquidity risk, and cybercrime. Last, I sincerely thank the Qatar Financial Markets Authority for hosting the 18th Union Arab Securities Authority meeting and the 3rd Arab Capital Markets Conference. Thank you.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يعني أنا هتحدث في هذه اللحظة باللغة العربية، وبعدين نبقى بنكمل باللغة الإنجليزية مع السادة الزملاء هنا. يعني بنشكر هيئة قطر للأسواق المالية على تنظيم المؤتمر الثالث لاتحاد هيئات أسواق المال، للأهمية القصوى في هذه الفترة لما نمر به من تحديات جسام تواجه سواء على مستوى الإقليم، على مستوى الاقتصادات الناشئة والأسواق المحيطة. يمكن نود التأكيد قبل أن نضلع في شرح واستيضاح ما نواجهه من تحديات أن أسواق رأس المال هي ليست فقط لها دور رئيسي في تعبئة المدخرات، لكن هي تساهم في خلق طبقة وسطى في المجتمعات بصورة أكبر وأيسر بكثير من أي اجتهادات أخرى. عملية الادخار التراكمي التدريجي والاستثمار التراكمي التدريجي هي المحك في خلق مثل هذه الطبقات، إن استطاعت الاقتصادات المختلفة من تعبئة المدخرات على مستوى تدريجي واستثمارها من خلال أسواق رأس المال. قولا واحدا، الاضطرابات التي نشهدها على المستوى الجيوسياسي تؤثر على الاقتصادات وتؤثر على أسواق المال سلبا، لكن هي كيفية التعامل مع هذه التقلبات هي التي بتحكم المسار. أحد التحديات الإضافية هو معدلات التضخم التي يواجهها الاقتصاديات المتقدمة، أو الاقتصاديات الناشئة أيضا، والتي أثرت على معدلات النمو الاقتصادي الحقيقي من جانب، وأثرت أيضا على التوقعات بتخفيض معدلات أسعار الفائدة التي كان متوقع لها بالنسبة للولايات المتحدة الأمريكية، والتي تؤثر على كافة أسعار العائد أو الفائدة على مستوى العالم، يمكن من 5 مرات إلى 2 مرات فقط كتوقعات لنهاية هذا العام، نتيجة ما يسمى بالستيكي انفليشن في الأسواق المتقدمة، والهاي انفليشن أو الهايبر انفليشن في الأسواق النامية. وكل هذا له تأثيرات على الاقتصاد الحقيقي، ومن ثم على الشركات المقيد لها أوراقا مالية في أسواق رأس المال أو في البورصات. عندنا بعضا من الإشكاليات التي نواجهها على المستوى العالمي، سواء من أزمات لاقتصادات محددة قد ينتج عنها تشابكات عالمية بما يؤثر على الاستقرار المالي، وبالأخص مشكلة أو الأزمات المتوقعة فيما يتعلق بالسوق العقاري بالصين. عندنا التحدي الكبير والذي يعلمه الجميع هو التغيرات المناخية، وكيفية صعوبة الحصول على تمويلات لتمويل مشروعات في عملية التكيف والتخفيف. قد يكون عمليات يعني نستطيع أن نقول أن هناك قصور كبير على المستوى العالمي في تمويل مشروعات التخفيف على مدار السنوات المنصرمة، مما أدى إلى ضرورة الاهتمام وعدم الأخذ بمعيار خفيف فيما يتعلق بمشروعات التكيف. ما نشهده من تغيرات على مستوى التطورات البيئية والتغيرات المناخية أصبح له أثر كبير وتكلفة عظمى على الاقتصادات. يجب هنا أن يكون هناك وقفة لتمويل عمليات التكيف مع هذه المتغيرات، بما أن الاقتصادات والمؤسسات التمويل الدولية قد يكون قصرت عن تحقيق مستهدفاتها فيما يتعلق بتمويل عمليات التخفيف adaptation and mitigation. معدلات الاستدانة المرتفعة بالنسبة للأسواق الناشئة، ويجب على المستوى العالمي تنظيمات لعملية استبدال هذه معدلات الاستدانة بتمويل لمشروعات أيضا تساهم في عملية التكيف والتخفيف للأبعاد البيئية. وآخر تحدي بنواجهه هو النمو المضطرد في الاعتماد على التكنولوجيا والاعتماد على ما يسمى بالذكاء الاصطناعي أو الجنراتيف artificial intelligence، والذي له تحديات جسام تجعل هيئات الرقابة دائما في عملية تحدي لكيفية الرقابة على هذه الأدوات وهذه الأنظمة، وكيفية الرقابة على هذه الأسواق لحماية المستثمرين والتأكد على عملية الاستقرار. ومن ثم كل هذا الأمر يتطلب، وهو ما قاله السيد تجندر في بداية حديثه في افتتاح المؤتمر، المؤتمر هو الكاباسيتي بيلدينج أو التطوير للعاملين في هذه القطاعات، وهذا هو أهم يعني متطلب وتحدي لأسواق المال. هو كل ما سردناه من تحديات وإمكانية لمعالجة لهذه التحديات يتطلب قدرة على الإنفاذ وقدرة على التنفيذ كبيرة جدا من قبل المنفذين على أرض الواقع والرقباء بكل هيئات الرقابة. بدون التدريب الكاف لهذه المؤسسات والتدريب الكافي لكافة العاملين بهذه المؤسسات دائما ما سنظل بنلهث وراء هذه المتغيرات والتحديات لحين يعني العمل على هذه التنمية، وهو الأمر الذي نركز عليه على مستوى لجنة الأسواق الناشئة والنمو بمنظمة الأيوسكو، لأن هو ده اللي احنا أخذناه على عاتقنا، أن أي مكان التحدي هو كيفية التعامل مع هذا التحدي هو الذي يخلق الفارق. شكرا جزيلا وآسف لو كنت أطلت، وهنستمع بقى تحديدا بقى لكل سوق ما قام من تغييرات وتطورات رقابية على مستوى السوق. شكرا جزيلا.
Excellent, thank you both. And I think you've met three of our panelists, and the fourth, Nandini Sukumar, is known, I'm sure, to many of you as the CEO of the World Federation of Exchanges. So let's get down to our panel now. As we've heard from the various keynotes, Arab capital markets have undergone significant development in the last decade, and governments have developed their regulatory infrastructure to create an increasingly attractive marketplace for investors both domestically and internationally. And in common with other regions, the area is ramping up to commit to net zero, and developments are seen in technology, as we've heard, from digitalization to artificial intelligence. And alongside all of these developments, regulators have to ensure investors continue to be protected, and there's a continued push for transparency in the light of things such as the emergence of private markets. And overshadowing all of this, of course, we have geopolitical tensions that threaten market stability. And so with these themes today, we're going to examine their impact, look at the challenges and opportunities, and look at the role that regulators play in the developing Arab financial markets. And so what I'd like to do first is go to Tajinder. We heard from you earlier about particularly the Arab region, but could you pull out some key themes that you see happening within the capital markets from your sort of unique position of IOSCO and looking at the world as a whole?
Indeed, thank you very much. So maybe the thing that I would want to mention is that as we look at the themes globally and then how they are getting echoed regionally in the Arab markets. So globally, what we have seen is that there has been a lot of discussion about, what is going to happen with the economic and financial market outlook. I think in terms of the expectations that were there with regard to, is it going to be a soft landing? Is it going to be a hard landing? And I think that generally what we have found is, we have our board members here as well. So at the board, we had a discussion about what the outlook is looking like. And the outlook has certainly improved compared to where it was earlier. So in the beginning of 2024, we have seen that the outlook appears to have improved. However, there are persistent risks that are associated with corporate debt, with commercial real estate, and with refinancing challenges. And so there is an elevated risk level that is also highlighting the interconnected nature of the macro financial landscape and the need for comprehensive risk management strategies. But also, if you talk about geopolitics and the aspect about fragmentation, there is uncertainty in terms of a possibly heightened fragmentation, because that complicates international coordination during crisis, but also challenges the traditional market perception about geopolitical risks that they are only short-term. They can end up having a longer term in that sense. Now, with all of that, I think what we have seen is that the themes that have also been there in the region. We know that there has been focus, as you mentioned, about the focus on transparency and investor protection and corporate governance. We have seen that in this region. We have seen also how the region is looking to use technological innovation to improve market efficiency and accessibility, also about using regional harmonization to facilitate cross-border investment and to create a more integrated market. But also, as I had mentioned earlier, the diversification away from fossil fuels and going into ESG and carbon markets. And we have, again, in this panel, all actually of the members in this panel are very actively engaged in this. For instance, about carbon markets, we have had a very, very interesting discussion. And not surprisingly, and this is probably the last point I want to make in my opening, is that not surprisingly, what we are seeing as the key themes in this region are getting mirrored into the IOSCO work plan that we have approved and we have published only on the 12th of April. And they include things like sustainability and fintech, where you have the work stream that we have on green finance, the whole aspect about the engagement with the ISSB on corporate disclosure, but also on assurance with regard to that disclosure, where we are working with the standard setting bodies in the assurance and ethics area. We are looking to finalize our work on voluntary carbon markets, where we have issued a consultation paper, and we will be finalizing that in the course of this year. The work that we are doing on transition plans by issuers of securities and asset managers, the work on green finance, green bonds, that is starting up now. And that's on that side. On the fintech side, again, where we are is with regard to crypto assets, not just about policy recommendations, but we are now moving into the implementation phase and monitoring implementation of our recommendations on crypto assets. And then the work that is starting up on AI and financial asset tokenization. The work that we are doing in our work plan also includes the work on financial resilience. And let us not forget about the markets, how they behave under stressed conditions, the classical open-ended funds, the liquidity risks there, and the possibility of leverage risks in the context of indebtedness, the aspect about private finance and its increasing role. We have seen how the work that IOSCO has done has shown how there is increased investment in private finance as opposed to public markets, including from participants like pension funds. And now with the changed macroeconomic scenario, these are being subjected to headwinds. The work that IOSCO in its work plan has also is going to undertake on market effectiveness with regard to, for instance, things like credit default swaps. And I think the important part, again, and this is with the point with which I would like to close these opening remarks, is the work on regulatory cooperation and effectiveness, the work that we are seeking to do on building capacity. I don't think that can be overemphasized. And we are calling it next gen. And that is about nurturing excellence through growth, education, and networking. And there is a huge role to be played by members in this region. And all the work that I have mentioned earlier that is resonating in this region is not just about policy, but about implementation on sustainable finance, including about building markets, including carbon markets. How is it that we are able to apply the proper principles of regulation there, but also not forgetting about the classical aspects of markets, about how enforcement needs to be there, proper corporate governance needs to be there, so that markets are indeed able to play their role. So I hope I have given you a sense of what we are doing inside IOSCO with the global work plan that has been derived from an assessment of the risk, but that is also mirroring what we are seeing happening in the region. And back to you with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tajinder. And I think we'll definitely drill down later into ESG and sustainability and, of course, artificial intelligence. And you also touched on a subject which I don't think we had spoken about in our preparation calls, which is operational resiliency, which is a huge, huge thing. But Nandini, I'd like to come to you because we're talking about some of the trends and looking at the future, although the future seems to be here already. But you wanted to stress the need for proper fundamentals for capital markets before we start running into these newer things. Can you expand on that, please?
Thanks, Salyan. And I think that Tajinder actually Tajinder's intro was was a thoughtful and interesting one. It touched both on the fundamentals and on the future. And if you look at what we need, what do we need in the region? And like Tajinder and like IOSCO, WFE is a global organization. In our case, we represent the market infrastructure, so exchanges and CCPs, whereas IOSCO is representing the regulatory organizations. So if you look at the fact that exchanges and CCPs are often the frontline regulators in the market, charged with keeping a fair, orderly, and transparent market, and I look up at our member at the Qatar Stock Exchange as I say that, we are, I think, you understand perhaps a little bit where I'm coming from. To start off with, I would say on a fundamental level, what are the pillars of a well-functioning capital market ecosystem? And they are universal, right? You need to have, first of all, you need to have a pool of tradable product, and that's the primary market. So you need to grow, and you need to enhance, you need to be able to have your policy levers tilted towards enhancing that primary market. In this region, and to say in this region, there's such difference sometimes from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. But in this region, you look at listings, right? Let's look at equity listings. So there needs to be, I think, a clear focus on building listings, encouraging companies to come to market. And to date, we have seen, what we've seen especially is that state-run enterprises, which are often the primary source of listings as markets emerge, have been coming to market. So we need to have a healthy pipeline of listings and policy incentives, regulatory incentives designed to encourage them to come to the market rather than stay in the private market, right? The second thing you need is liquidity. You need to grow and enhance liquidity in secondary markets. So once you have the pool of primary, of tradable securities, and I think a lot of the Islamic financing debate, sukuk, and other products are fascinating as a topic. But you need to list, and then you need to have liquidity in those listed products. And again, you need to have policy incentives that bring that forward. And third, you need to have appropriate risk mitigation. And that's it could be through the use of the CCP. Neza spoke about the derivatives markets, and derivatives markets are emerging in this region. There is a point in the sequencing of markets where you go from equity. First, actually, typically you go fixed income, equity, derivatives, and with that you need clearing and risk mitigation. A lot of the region at present uses the CSD model to manage the risk. But you need appropriate risk mitigation. And then a final pillar is, if you like, the fact that markets everywhere will have like a global baseline standard. So if you look with regulators, they will look to IOSCO and the MMOU, they will look to IOSCO's regulatory standards. With exchanges, market infrastructures, and CCPs, they will look to the WFE principles, to meet those global baseline principles to demonstrate that they are, international or best in class. So markets in this region need to have, I think, that move, that the policy incentives, the regulatory incentives need to be able to encourage markets to move towards meeting, global best practice everywhere. And a final thought, which I ask all of you in this room to hold, the markets in this region, the exchanges, the CCPs, the CSDs, and then, of course, the wider capital market system which they serve, the brokers, the banks, the issuers, etc., all of them are emerging. So you can't as you come out as in a developing market or in a market that needs development, you need to be focused on two things. You need to be focused first on nurturing that market so it can grow. And it's only when you have a growing market that you can determine the appropriate level of supervision. You always need to ensure market integrity and good conduct. So you need good corporate governance that needs to be enshrined in the market. But those of us in this room, we are regulator or regulated entity like exchange and CCP. So we are the regulated part of the market. And so you need, when you supervise, you need to be able to ensure that you have a market to supervise. So you need to ensure always that you are growing as well as supervising and enforcing.
Thank you for that, Nandini. And Neza, looking to Morocco, which is actually obviously a different jurisdiction, do the things that Tajinder and Nadine have talked about, do they resonate with you? What are the sort of challenges you see in Morocco specifically?
Thank you. Yes, well, in Morocco we have the same challenges and also targets than all markets, regional markets, emerging markets, but also developed markets. We have currently, I was listening to what Nandini was saying, because we have recently launched our strategy for the next 5 years, and we have started, it's our third strategy since the regulator has become an independent authority 8 years ago, and with more mandates. So our strategy was really thought with the market industry, with all the stakeholders, and clearly the first target is how to build and to grow the market in order to have so that it can be more efficient, more accessible, so that it can finance investment and the economy and projects. So this was clearly our first, the first pillar of our strategy. So how to build the market, how to diversify the products, but also how to attract issuers. Also, as Nandini, you were talking about, to have an efficient secondary market, it goes with also enlarging the number of investors of the market. We have in economies like in Morocco, but also like in many markets in the area, be it Africa or the Arab region. Our markets, of course, not all the markets are the same, but attract more institutional and high net worth individual and private investor, institution, local or international, and the retail market is not what it should be. So, one way to develop it is to see how we can go towards this, how we can attract individual investors. It works with, of course, capacity building, financial education, but also all the tools, especially digitalization, to make our markets more accessible. So it's an important pillar as well. Another pillar is innovation and sustainability, and in our country, since 2016, since COP22, we committed. The whole financial community committed to put in place the tools to finance sustainability. And we've had a long journey. We can talk about it later if there is any time. And as our mandate is also to protect investors, we need to adapt our enforcement with modernized tools, probably with AI, to adapt ourselves to the new markets, to this evolution, especially in fintech, in new markets. So that would be some.
Now that's a great start. And Doctor, if I may come to you, you wear many hats, but perhaps we could, as Neza mentioned sustainability and ESG, perhaps we could go on to this topic now. You have a specific area where you are working with GFANZ, the Glasgow Financial Alliance to Net Zero. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing from that point of view, and also more generally about ESG in the region, because obviously it's something that is of increasing importance, but perhaps wasn't a primary objective 10 years ago or so.
Thank you very much, and maybe I just maybe disagree with what we have pledged internationally, that there will be funding for mitigation projects. I totally disagree when it comes to meeting the targets that did not happen internationally. So basically, yes, in every single COP, we get to agree and we get to pledge certain figures associated on an annual basis, 100 billion mark, 200, whatever figures that we get to acknowledge and pledge for investing in emerging markets and in projects that tackle mitigation and reduce carbon emissions globally, but actually we fall short on an annual basis from these targets. So basically, yes, there is an increased interest, but when it comes to implementation on the ground is not happening so much, and I believe the speed of climate change and what we're seeing in the region and globally, and it is quite astonishing when you get to see that we might be the lowest emitters, Africa, Middle East, Arab nations in general, but we are the most exposed when it comes to climate change and the coastal areas and what might be happening. So basically, you're paying the price for ages of, I would say, carbon emissions that hasn't been dealt with. So this is just a point of order that I would like to put, that we have not met internationally, and international agencies and international developmental banks and so on and so forth, they have not been meeting basically the pledges that have been put internationally. So we hope that when it comes for adaptation, it is different, because adaptation affects immediately lives of people that are affected by the climate change. When it comes for SDGs and developments in this area, or regarding SDG and carbon emissions, etc., in the Arab nation, I might disagree as well a little bit. It has been on the agenda for quite a number of years in the entire region, maybe with different starting dates. But I can give you, for example, in the Egyptian context, we have been tinkering with the idea of issuing an index, and actually the first ESG index was issued in 2010 with Standard & Poor's, between the EGX and Standard & Poor's in that area, and that was in 2010. So it has been on the rise, and I believe all markets are taking it to a very serious implementation, and each one has, either from a non-mandatory perspective, adopting some of the methodologies, and thanks God, it's not anymore like we don't have a global baseline. This was one of the issues. Previously, we had the TCFD as one of the frameworks, GRI as one of the frameworks, SASB, UN Global Compact, you name it. We had around 7-8 frameworks for reporting on ESG and on carbon emissions and carbon footprints and so on and so forth. Nowadays, we have one global baseline, which is the IFRS S1 and S2, and S3 is coming, of course, on the way, but IFRS S1 and S2. So this is a global baseline which takes into consideration some complementarities and implementations from SASB, because it's a sectoral perspective. And now we have a benchmark whereby you can say, I'm how far from this global benchmark in that area. So for example, in the Egyptian context, we need to do some efforts, because we had pledged, we have mandated reports using the TCFD framework, and it was mandatory, it is mandatory on companies. So we're just starting to receive the reports, while we need to change it from TCFD now to the IFRS, but we need to put it in Egyptian Arabic so that our companies can implement it from a local perspective going forward. So this is one area. Another area when it comes to sustainability, and I believe not only Egypt but as well Saudi Arabia had been working on with differential approaches, and here I'll be saying what we have in IOSCO as well as differences rather than things that we get to agree upon. It is carbon markets, because ultimately, and voluntary in specific compliance of, it is organized Article 6.2 within the Paris Agreement. It says governments needs to be regulating the compliance markets for carbon credits, and they decide on it. However, you have an untapped market when it comes to voluntary carbon markets that hasn't been touched extensively as we would have hoped for. There has been always discussions at the STF level, the Sustainability Task Force at IOSCO, where should financial sector regulators stop? Because we At IOSCO level, they always assume we just need to tackle the disclosure component of listed companies. Even when regulating voluntary carbon markets, should we wish to regulate it, we need to take a step back in that area, because it touches not only financial integrity but environmental integrity, and this is not our game plan, or this is not our field. We took a different perspective at the FRA, to be honest. We realized that without at least setting the framework for regulating and listing projects with potential carbon credit emissions. It is a potential. I mean, you start on a project that would come with a carbon credit emission certificate, in the future. So we put the regulatory frameworks and what is required from those particular projects to come and list at the FRA, and here we had to embark environmental regulators. The easiest thing to happen for market development, or for regulators, when tackling market development, and here I do understand where Nandidi is coming from, is to say no. And the more regulators that are prone to say no to any market development is environmental regulators, even before financial sector regulators. So it's always challenging when we try to embark or put them with us on the same page. Let's move this forward, because people didn't know the process. But as well, and this would be my last point, the cost for verification and validation was quite high, and people didn't know the process to have a project initially that can be issuing carbon credits going forward. They didn't know the process, and when they know the process, the associated cost with verification and validation, given that we didn't know what are the requirements, was quite hefty, and mainly international players were only the players in the verification and validation components of the projects for issuing carbon credits. So we started again, we had to study. I mean, financial sector regulators need to study more about environment and carbon markets. So we had to study what are the requirements for having verification and validation bodies. We realized that it is some ISO certifications. So basically, we put the regulatory requirements for those verification and validation bodies to be participating. And then the final component, of course, it is the market, because we are putting all of this for these carbon credits to be listed with the exchanges to be traded in the local market. But one final important component are the registries, because here we always used to deal with registries as a distant animal from the capital markets, while in fact carbon registries are more or less like custodian entities and custodian banks. This is the entity whereby you get to hold this carbon credit and ensure that it is assigned by this person, and so on and so forth, to ensure that we have no greenwashing, we have no manipulation when it comes to issuances of those carbon credits. So we issued as well, in collaboration with the World Bank, the requirements for establishing private registries and private methodologies for the accountability or accounting for this area. And I believe as well Saudi Arabia and UAE, they have as well markets like we have in the Egyptian context, and hopefully one day we can collaborate in terms of creating a critical mass. And critical mass in terms of supply and critical mass in terms of demand. I'm not worried about demand in terms of developing the market. We can ensure as financial sector regulators that there will be demand, as we can mandate our regulated entities that you need to have some participation in these markets, which is very much natural to achieve the GFAN's target of having a net zero target by the year 2030. So it is possible, but we need the supply, and for the supply to be happening, they needed regulatory frameworks, and I spoke too much, sorry. Thank you.
No, that's quite all right. And in the interest of time, because it's not purely an ESG panel, I'm going to move it on to artificial intelligence, which has come up multiple times already this morning. And we've seen in Europe, the Artificial Intelligence Act has been the first piece of legislation globally. We've seen in the UAE, there is a minister for AI. If I come back to you, Tajinder, perhaps you could just give a little bit of a flavor of how IOSCO is looking at artificial intelligence, please.
Indeed. Thank you, Salian. And let me also connect it back a little bit to the theme that I was picking up also from Dr. Saleh, which is really about, so there is this question about is this something entirely new, or has stuff been going on for a bit of time? And I think what was being mentioned in the context of sustainability applies also probably for technology, specifically AI. So, so interestingly, I would say that while the rise of generative AI is something that is very recent, IOSCO had undertaken work even 3-4 years ago in 2017. Can you believe this? We had this as one of our key priorities. And then we did some work on that. But what is happening, I think, and I go to Dr. Saleh's point here, which is about that, the speed, the rate of change is changing. So you see the acceleration that is happening there. So if you come to AI there, yes, we were talking about aspects previously about, whether it's black box, lack of explainability, automaticity, is there a human in the loop, and so on. Those were the questions that we were talking about previously. And therefore, we had come to some key aspects, which is about, having proper stress testing of algorithms, which is about proper, the need for proper human resources and training inside regulators as well as regulated entities. But I think what is now changing is that we are at an inflection point where the scale at which AI is beginning to be used, the pervasiveness at which it is being used, the speed at which AI systems operate, the complexity of the underlying models. I think those, and you have to simply just look at the phenomenon of deep fakes to see how there has been a bit of a game change there. And so the aspect of pervasiveness, of concentration in a few models, and of speed, I think these are the points that are quite important. They do impact all three IOSCO objectives that I was talking about earlier. Investor protection, clearly, if you are having, herding and so on, and or the use of deep fakes, mis-selling, investor protection gets affected, market integrity gets affected, and financial stability also can get affected. So we are therefore, very interestingly, we are looking at it through our FinTech task force that is getting into the issues of investor protection and market integrity, the use of these new phenomena. How do they relate to the work that we have previously done? Do our previous recommendations continue to be valid, or do they need to be changed? Do they need to be updated in the light of the recent phenomena? And the aspect about financial stability, where we have, sorry to talk about the internal cooking of IOSCO, but we have the financial stability engagement group that is also going to be, looking at this with the FinTech task force in terms of saying, what does it mean for financial stability? And what does it mean for financial stability in markets? And therefore, how do we also relate to the work of bodies like the Financial Stability Board? So in that sense, that's essentially, Sally, and the point that I'm making, which is about saying that we are in a number of things, including sustainable finance, but your point about technology, about AI, we seem to be at an inflection point where the rate of change is changing, and you see that acceleration. And what that is needing is for us to go back to what we have done, because it is not entirely new, but it is sufficiently changing that we need to look back and see whether what the work we have done continues to be valid, or do we need a new way to think about it? Do we need new tools about them? And how do we then help our markets in this region in terms of saying, okay, this is what the thinking is. Do you agree? And if so, how do we build capacity and encourage implementation?
Thank you, Tajinder. Nadini, you wanted to jump in there?
Yes, I did actually, on 2 points. One is, I think Tajinder has, illustrated or put his finger on really what's different now, because AI has existed in financial markets for decades. So if you look at algorithmic trading and some of the other digitization mechanisms we've seen, especially during the pandemic, AI has been around for ages. So what's happening is that the rate of change has, and as change occurs, risks emerge, right? So what I think everybody needs to do, and this is a classic case, where we need to understand what the risks are, and the risks are emerging as opposed to existing. We spoke very briefly about operational resilience. And at the time, I wanted to say, given geopolitical issues, the structures have been very resilient in this region, and that's something to be proud about. So as we look at emerging risk in the context of AI, I think retail is a classic one and an area to look at. It's to look at where it flows out across the chain, the trading chain, and that's where our members are very focused on quantifying and mapping risks even as they use AI. In terms of regulation, I think it's the approach that IOSCO takes is a very enlightened one, which is it says, let's look at what we have now. Is it sufficiently capturing what is there at present or not? And when we start with an approach like that, you have evolutionary regulation as opposed to kind of whiplash regulation, which occurs every single time there's a new phenomena.
Yeah, and that fits in nicely to the question I was going to put to Neza, and perhaps you can elaborate. You mentioned that one of the pillars in Morocco is innovation. So how do you as a regulator manage that innovation whilst also balancing it with investor risk, particularly as we've heard with something like artificial intelligence, it's increasing at such a speed, the regulator is always having to catch up. How do you find that? How do you deal with that?
Well, we're tackling innovation. We have started to tackle innovation with everything regarding sustainability, where we started with understanding the market, also going through guidelines that was for sustainability to explain to issuers how they could issue sustainable bonds, but also explaining to the investors what were the standards, the international standards that we were using, and so trying first to understand the market and see how we could develop the tools for the Moroccan market. So this. We started with the guidelines, and then we would put the legislation. For instance, we worked on ESG standard. We made mandatory the ESG report. I mean, that was to start. We start understanding, seeing what is being done on the international side, what's the international standards, and then. Analyze the risks and also set up the standards for the Moroccan market. So more or less for fintech, this is what we are doing again. And in fintech, of course, you have AI, but you have all sorts of tools. We even integrated crowdfunding platform within this environment of fintech. So we're doing the same, understanding following the international trends and developments in the field, then assess the potential impacts of all these developments on the Moroccan market, engage with the ecosystem. So for fintech, the ecosystem is a different one than the one we know when it comes to securities. And so we had to engage with all the startup incubators, technology university, and we also took a sectoral approach. So we work together with the other financial regulators, central bank, insurance regulator, different ministry, finance, technology, to build up a center for knowledge and expertise. We did we also, and this is where international cooperation is interesting, because we looked at what other markets were doing. We were very interested by a few actions, especially the center of technology that was built in Saudi Arabia. We looked at that, and so we take regional expertise to try and build. So we launched a fintech portal, and today, together with the rest of the stakeholders, we have worked on a comprehensive diagnosis of what is the fintech sector in the market, and we're building a roadmap to tackle the challenges, the risk challenges, but also to help enterprises and startups in that.
Great, thank you. And we've heard multiple times geopolitics. Doctor, if I could maybe come to you as someone from Egypt, which has actually been impacted by geopolitics over the last year or so. Perhaps you could sort of give an overview of how Egypt is working to mitigate the risks, and what the region more generally, how it is positioned.
Well, it's surprising to me that you're saying Egypt is affected by geopolitics. I mean, we're not affected in general.
I was thinking more things like the Red Sea and tourism and the
fair enough. But in all cases, it is about how you deal with these situations and incidents. For us, it is quite clear that this is something that has been there for quite a number of time. I mean, a number of years. We have been seeing some turbulent environment and geopolitical tensions, I would say, since the Arab Spring in 2011. So we are very accustomed to how to deal with it, and we're seeing, I would say, improvements when it comes to the macroeconomic situation and stability, with the level of investments that we are targeting, and some of the monetary policy sector reforms and fiscal policy reforms that took place during the previous, I would say, 6 to 8 months. We are seeing very much improvement in that area. So the ultimate point is to continue working. I mean, it is something that is there, a fact of life that you need to deal with. It is about how you deal with it, and that you continue in implementing the reform plans that you are aiming to implement to either expand markets, like I'm going to speak a little bit about technology, and to create resilience in our macroeconomic setup and as well our sectoral setup. When it comes to technology, because it is part of the resilience, we had to, or we realized that we were quite stringent as a regulator in allowing companies to be relying on technology. We were quite, I would say, not flexible with some of the measures that might be taken, and that's why we took, I wouldn't say a different approach, but a complete approach. So we had to, because the difficult component, it is very easy to be speaking about, yeah, you need to take or to be aware of generative AI and how it impacts the market and, you know, technology and how you do it, but how you do it on the ground is the challenge for every single regulator. That is the challenging component. So the starting point that we started with was capacity building for the technology sector at the FRA extensively. Hence now we have, all of us, myself and my colleagues at the FRA, do have a complete understanding of what is needed to transform the market 180 degrees. That was the starting point. The second point, that we are a very young society. Basically, we are around 75% or 80% of the population less than 35 years old. So basically, unless we realize that electronic onboarding needs to be tackled, and tackled very quickly, we will always have difficulties when it comes to financial literacy and financial penetration of the different insurance products, capital market products, and financing products. So hence, we issued a very comprehensive guideline and decrees that governs how you do electronic identification in details. it is not about putting just principles, but it was in details. How you do electronic identification, how you do electronic KYC, and what are the automated linkages that you need to have to assess the anti-money laundering lists of that you should not be accepting to onboard and so on. And then electronic contracts, because electronic onboarding is something and eKYC is something. And then the e-contracts itself, because if you do all of this and you still require a youngster who's 21 years old that you need to go and travel for, and you know, Egypt is quite big and crowded. So to move from one place to another, you will need to have at least an hour and a half for them to sign physically a certain contract. They decide they wouldn't want to opt for this insurance product or this capital market product and so on. So we put as well what is required for companies to do the e-contracts. But the challenge that we're seeing, that most fintech companies, and because we get to be involved on a very much regular basis, get to assume that fintech is about having a nice interface and a nice program with a nice interface, with a nice user interface, and so on and so forth, and that's the fintech. No, it requires a hell of work behind this interface in terms of IT governance, in terms of infrastructure requirements, cybersecurity, because using or relying on this type of technology is basically has the authority in front of courts that this transaction that took place without seeing the client, without dealing with the client, and the client is being onboarded electronically, has the sufficient legal backing and standing in front of a court in any disputes that might be happening. And hence, we need to make sure as regulators that these components are quite bulletproof when it comes to security and ensuring that the IT governance for those particular fintech companies is working in the right direction. But without, I believe, without penetration, fintech and associated with it, AI and so on and so forth, without it, I don't believe that we will be seeing any improvements in the penetration ratios for capital market products and actually reach to the same level of other products that, because they don't have any regulatory frameworks or regulatory requirements, anyone can be doing anything that you see. Penetration is quite easy for them. Thank you.
Okay, Nandini, you wanted to
Just very briefly, actually, I think Fareed has done a fantastic job at tackling a difficult subject. Geopolitics sits outside the purvey of everyone in this room, right? It's upstream. And really the purpose, the function, the role of everyone is to ensure that business can continue as normal to the extent that it can. That is, can the regulator continue to do their role? Can the market infrastructures continue to, do they stay open and operate? Can the brokers continue to work, in the secondary market? Can issuers continue to come to the market to fund? Because a time of crisis is often a time also of increased funding requirements. And that is really the prism with which all of us in this room probably look at it. It sits outside of us. And let me give you an example. If you look at COVID, which was not geopolitical, but it was a huge crisis, IOSCO issued very helpful, very clear guidance on keeping the market open. And the WFE issued very clear guidance independently, but supporting IOSCO independently, telling our members, we expect that the exchange stays open for business. We expect that business as normal continues. And that is because when there is a crisis, the investor needs to be able to trade, companies need to be able to finance. It may not always be possible, but this needs to be the prism with which we all approach and do approach any kind of external factor. And the world is growing more uncertain, not less.
Thank you. And I think everybody has probably somewhat answered my sort of last question before we close the panel. But Tajinder, if I come to you first, as a member of IOSCO, which is one of the oversight bodies that looks after regulatory capital markets, how do you see IOSCO continuing to support and enhance the Arab financial markets going forward?
Thanks. I think I will also use this opportunity to reflect a little bit on this previous conversation, because I think it is, the one word that strikes me is leapfrogging. And, that is the use of technology. And that were some of the points that were being made here. which is about saying there is so much change happening, which is not just a threat, but also an opportunity. And therefore, technology, sustainable finance, carbon markets, all of these present opportunities for this region to accelerate development of capital markets, and that can happen through leapfrogging, through the use of more investor education, through more capacity building. And I think that is something that is probably true across the board, whether we are talking about fintech, about AI, about crypto assets, about carbon markets, registries, tokenization, all of those things. And I think IOSCO therefore is there to be able to help members to be able to use the opportunity to actually leapfrog development, not go through the standard process of following, always playing catch up, but also to be able to actually jump over and I think that presents extremely exciting opportunities for this region, and we are there to be able to support capacity building of members in this region.
That's great.
You did not answer the question, Tajinder. I mean, what are you going to do more for the Arab markets?
I think the point there, Dr. Fari, is really about capital markets development. It is about market development. It is about capacity building in this region. So I think in that sense, to be able to do this, one has to be able to get to the place where we are able to implement global principles, because we cannot be talking about Arab markets in isolation. These are connected to global markets. What is happening in the global phenomena is going to affect the Arab capital markets themselves. And therefore, if regulators and if market participants have built capacity there, that is the role that we are playing. We do hope that that is going to be able to present exciting opportunities for this region to be able to benefit from the demographic dividend that is there. And that is the entire area about the use of technology for capacity building, about being able to have more targeted, because as you're aware, Dr. Farid, one of the aspects where we have probably been not so very good at is about essentially painting probably, the emerging markets with the same brush. And we are now taking a far more nuanced and approach and segmented approach in terms of looking at what the stage of development is of the different members, including the members in the Arab region, and adopting these programs and capacity building programs that are tailored, that are specific to the members of this region. And we have, already laid out a blueprint that is already under active discussion.
Thank you, Tajinder. And I think on this panel, we could have spent a separate panel talking about ESG, artificial intelligence. We didn't even touch crypto. But if I could ask Dr. and Neza, Dr. first, maybe just some closing remarks, key takeaways.
Maybe what we could do, I'd like to maybe complement the answer of Tajinder. What are we doing within the Arab markets? How we're working? And it is what helped us. First, our similarity, we all want to develop, there's a strong will to develop capital markets and to develop their role in the economy. So, and what we're doing, and as Tajinder was saying, there are global principles for regulators that we embrace. So how we help each other by sharing expertise to the process, and how we have been able, or how we are, our ability to be able to put in place and to this international standard on a regional basis, on a local basis. So, this cooperation that we're having within regional committees, where we have decided what is important for us. It was sustainability, fintech, also capacity building. So this, and market development. This is what all the members of the region want to want to look at in order to develop their own markets. So I think our cooperation between members, I think, is key, and help us be more efficient in our daily, day-to-day life, which, as you said, is not easy, where certainty is our everyday job. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any closing words, Doctor?
Well, one key point, we need to have a level playing field. The disparity between unregulated markets or private markets and public markets is growing by the hour. So private markets need to be at least partially, I wouldn't say has to be regulated, but at least from a disclosure perspective, because whomever would want to go to public markets, you get to ask them for carbon emissions, ESG disclosures, financial disclosures, and the like. And if you are in the public markets, you don't get to ask them anything as from a regulatory perspective. So here we need to ensure that the regulatory arbitrage is being decreased a bit or lessened a bit compared to what were happening. I agree with Nandini 100%. You need to have a market first to regulate. So we need to always put an eye on market reforms and market development, as we're putting an eye as regulators for market regulation and supervision in that area. With the speed of development of AI, without relying on supervisory technology and regulatory technology, it would be very difficult for regulators to keep up with the speed of developments and the speed of changes that's happening in the market. And information here is key, and data is key. We need to change our models of gathering data regarding the players, regarding maybe at the FRA we're looking at a wider sector, so we need to gather data of specific loans that are being provided by financing companies or insurance products, but as well in capital markets. So the way we gather data from our regulated the regulated entities need to be very swift, electronic, and easy. So regulatory reporting and regulatory burden is being reduced on those entities, and for us to implement the subtech and supervisor technology and regulatory technology in that area. And all of the above without having proper capacity development programs and developing our colleagues working at the regulatory entities, we will always be lagging behind and basically taking our breath, trying to catch up with the changes that is happening. Thank you.
Thank you. And your point about private markets, and I know Nandini and I had spoken about it, there is growing concern about their emergence or their dominance that seems to be happening now. And just as an example, earlier this week in Bloomberg in London, our auditorium was standing room only with a gentleman from the Bank of England who gave a talk about private markets and the risks that they pose. So on that note, Nandini, can I ask you for your closing comments?
So looking at the region, looking at Arab capital markets, I mean, it's a wonderful title. Congratulations to Jalil and his team for bringing us all together here. What is the future? The future always needs to be, how do we attract investment into a market? How do we develop the market, right? That is the future. And with that in mind, I think that's the prism with which we should approach the roadmap for the next decade. What do we need to do? You need to grow the domestic investor base. You need to grow the institutional, international investor base as well. And together with the rest of the capital market ecosystem, you walk hand in hand towards that future. I actually want to conclude on a point that Fareed made, which is he said that capital markets are vital for society. If we didn't have capital markets, how would we all sustain ourselves? So the future is we must think creatively and constructively through the prism of development and supervision, market integrity as well as market development, about how we can enhance investment and investment flows to build that brighter future.
Thank you very much. And on that note, thank you to the audience for listening, and thank you to all of my panelists.
السادة الكرام، والآن نترككم مع استراحة لمدة 15 دقيقة لاستئناف أعمال المؤتمر مع الجلسة الثانية التي ستكون حول الاستدامة وتطبيق مبادئ الحوكمة منظور الرقابي.